There we go. So, for years I went to Sierra Leone, Africa, where the Ebola virus is. And I'd volunteer. And all of us as doctors pay our own way, go 2 or 3 weeks. I was younger then, too. And it's amazing how when you go to these other countries like that, people don't sleep. The team, they have a hard time sleeping. They're afraid, they're frightened. I had one nurse, I had to send her to therapy for 2 years after we came back from Sierra Leone. Poor girl, she did wonderful, but she had a hard time readjusting. So when you don't sleep, things don't consolidate well. And so we need sleep for memory, process what's happening during the day. We need sleep to reset everything. And so there's a couple things that happen in sleep. And I found this video that talks about melatonin. And let's get him started again, and you'll like him.
Superchiasmatic nucleus can help you focus.
Deep within the hypothalamus, you will find this locus. It controls your daily rhythm for sleep and wakefulness. Superchiasmatic nucleus can help you focus. Because at night I work my shift and sleep during the day.
I find I sometimes need a lift to keep the seas at bay.
Our doctor says the reason for our sleepiness is clear. We have shift work sleep disorder, but we don't need to fear. Our superchiasmatic nucleus will help us focus. Deep within our hypothalamus, we will find this locus. It controls our daily rhythm for sleep and wakefulness. Superchiasmatic nucleus will help us focus. So what I need to do is shift my circadian rhythm. To do this, you can use bright light.
Or else melatonin.
But daffodil's another choice to treat my sleep syndrome. Or else we may just fall asleep and crash while driving home. Our superchiasmatic nucleus will help us focus. Deep within our hypothalamus, we will find this locus. It controls our daily rhythm for sleep and wakefulness. Superchiasmatic nucleus will help us focus.
Okay, so what is it about sleep that helps you focus? I mean, there are things in our brains, there's biological clocks that are working all the time to help you wake up and help you sleep. And so you are being controlled by this clock, and you can affect the clock by what you do. So that thing called the superchiasmatic nucleus does something really unique that you and I can disturb. For example, how many of us like to look at our computers before we go to sleep? What color is the computer? When it's a dark screen, usually. It usually has a blue tone to it, right? And so when the brain eyes see blue, there's a signal that goes to the eyes that says it's daytime, and it tells this superchiasmatic nucleus, this clock in your brain, it's daytime. And what that clock does, it's an arm that just settles down over a gland called the pineal gland and says, it's daytime, don't release melatonin. So some of our young kids some of us too, we look at this blue light, it suppresses melatonin, and all of a sudden we're awake. We almost have insomnia. I have a college student that came to me for insomnia, and the only thing he did differently is put a piece of tape over the blue light of his stereo, and he's miraculously cured. I wish everybody was that way, but it's not. But so this blue light is something you and I can change to help our sleeping pattern. Because all of us need to sleep. All the animals in the kingdom need to sleep. And your makeup is so important that we actually have to sleep pretty much 8 hours a day. It's estimated 25 years of your life you'll spend sleeping. So there's a reason 25 years of your life to spend sleeping. And the clock makes you sleep, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So many of us need to sleep about 7 to 9 hours. And how many of you actually sleep 7 to 9 hours a night? You're the first group that's ever had that many hands.
The difference being in bed 7 to 9 hours and sleeping 7 to 9 hours.
That's exactly
I'm
right.
in bed 9 hours. I don't think I sleep it.
That's exactly right. This is what you need. The average person needs it. Some people need the full 9 hours. I have one patient that tells me if she sleeps 8 hours and 59 minutes, she is exhausted all day. So some of us are really sensitive to an exact amount of time. If you're working every day and really busy and shortening your sleep time, I tell individuals, wait till you go on vacation, let yourself sleep, and by the third night, whatever you're averaging, that's probably what you need in sleep. But we sleep deprive ourselves because of sometimes kids, we can't help it, work, responsibilities, and to be as healthy as possible, we need to push ourselves, not just to be in bed, but to sleep. And so we know now that memory and learning are important with sleep. Brain plasticity and synaptic pruning are big terms because when the brain is developing as a child, it's like you have all these extra neurons there, and the brain during sleep cuts off what's not needed. And one of the recent theories is this is a problem in some schizophrenics. They never had that pruning effect. And so things are out of order because our brains need to be pruned. And this is called plasticity. And we're readjusting our brains. And this happens during sleep. Immune function is compromised if you don't sleep. Brain growth, development, repair, hormones are affected when you don't sleep. Children who have disrupted sleep all the time and never enter stage 3 sleep may not grow as much as they should because during sleep you secrete growth hormone. And if you don't release growth hormone, mom and dad could be 6 feet tall and you're just kind of never really quite catching up. And so you need that stage 3 sleep. Well, I'm supposed to give you 10 minutes for questions, so maybe I'll do that, and I don't have a clue who this is, but it may be the patient upstairs. Okay, let me open up for some questions here.
Are you involved with the sleep clinic up on the 3rd floor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And somehow an error was made in the schedule, and they gave me a patient at 11.
Oh, no.
So I do apologize. The patient came at 10:50, and then, unfortunately, Pamela rescued me. But I hated to be rescued because, so I'll see the patient a little later. Yes, ma'am.
I sort of have an obvious question because my mother had pointed out the blue light as well, like blue night lights. But a friend of mine said, well, your eyes are closed. So how is that still affecting you?
Well, it can affect you until you close your eyes. And then once you close your eyes, there's that period of darkness, and then the melatonin will begin to rise.
But I'm saying if there's still blue light permeating in your room and your eyes are closed, it should not affect you.
It shouldn't affect you if your eyes are closed. But what I'm saying is there's a suppression of melatonin when darkness comes in the evening. And if you're looking at that blue light, the melatonin's not increasing. But if you're not looking at the blue light, and you're letting darkness hit your eyes, then the melatonin levels can begin to rise.
Okay, that's why I wear a sleep mask, because it seems like the more magnitude of darkness makes you feel like you're going to sleep.
And that's a very good thing. And that's a great thing to do. So whatever it takes to sleep better, if it's covering your eyes with something dark, that's what you do. Now, the other thing, people have insomnia that isn't really insomnia. Most of the people I see for insomnia don't have insomnia. Because we think if we're not asleep by 9:30 or 10, we have insomnia. But the reality is some of us, remember I talked about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that clock? Some of us, our regular clock, this is a genetic thing. You sleep at 12, you wake up at 8, you feel great. But if you have to wake up at 6, then you've shortened your sleep time, and you don't feel great. And so, if an individual is allowed to sleep whatever's normal for them, even though they don't fall asleep till 1, that's not really insomnia, that's more genetics. But we force ourselves. I've got one patient, her doctor has placed her on quetiapine, which is an antipsychotic. At low doses, it'll put you to sleep. Valium, 2 milligrams, and trazodone, 100 milligrams. That is quite the cocktail. You might as well drink a fifth of whiskey. I mean, that'll do the same thing. And the only reason she's on it is because she has to be asleep by 10. I said, well, what happens if you don't? Then she's working all night because her normal circadian rhythm is for her to go to sleep at 8 in the morning, sleep till about 5 in the afternoon, and she functions beautifully. That's genetics. But she has tried all these years to shift it to fit society. But now that she's retired, her husband says, let's just skip the drugs and do what's normal for you. I can live that way. And so that's what she's doing. She's going to wean herself off the drugs, work all night, sleep all day. And you say, that's terrible. And we call it a disorder, but it isn't a disorder. It's a disorder because it doesn't fit society, right? But think about, what did Stephen Jobs do? He found all these young kids that didn't want to go to sleep at 9 o'clock, fed them Mountain Dew and candy bars, and said, just play with these computers. Those kids didn't do too bad. But most of society doesn't fit into that picture. So we often say sleeping disorder, and we have to step back and say, if you're allowed to sleep what's normal for you, is it a disorder? It's not a disorder. You should try to, particularly as we get a little older and have choices, we should try to make our lives fit what's normal for us and not try to fit into society all the time. Because sleeping is good for you if you do it right. If you don't do it right, it's bad for you. Other questions? Good questions.
I have two sons who, being allowed to just do what they want to do, don't get up until 11:30 in the morning. And so when you're trying to plan a family occasion, it's very difficult because my daughter gets up at 6 o'clock and runs half a marathon. And so it's really difficult when you have people like that in the family.
It can be. You're right. But if it's their genetics, that's their genetics.
Yeah, and my husband is I'm morning people and he's night people.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why the kids turned up.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. They inherited it from us.
So we're to blame.
We are to blame. I have a family that has 3 kids, and the youngest goes to bed at 5. They can't keep them awake.
5 p.m.
5 p.m. Now, I spent 20 years in Wisconsin before coming here. And in Wisconsin, and I lived on a farm, it works beautifully if you're in Wisconsin on a farm. Go to bed at 5, get up at 3, work the fields. It's fantastic. But the other 2 kids go to bed at 10. And so, so I tell mom and dad, well, he's so hard to stay awake. Let him sleep and adjust life for him because the genetics are there. And so if we let our genetics take over, you'll sleep better, all these good things that are supposed to happen, they'll happen.
And we years ago had a friend who was from Israel who only needed 4 hours sleep. And so he accomplished all kinds of great scientific things. But his kids were all like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really hard on the mother when the kids are getting up after 4 hours sleep.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And again, that's genetics. That's a rare, smaller group of the population that are short time sleepers. Most of us aren't there.
Yeah.
Most of us need the 7.5 to 9, but you're right. Genetics takes over.
I think Napoleon was that way.
Napoleon?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. There we go. Yeah,
But
yeah.
And then teenagers, sorry.
Go ahead.
what about if you have interrupted sleep? Like, for example, my husband sleeps very well until 2 o'clock at night, and then he'll be at the computer for 2 hours because he's wide awake.
Right.
Yeah.
And the computer will self-perpetuate the waking cycle. It'll self-perpetuate. I get couples that come in and the wife has been taken away by the Roswell aliens because she disappears from 11 till 3. And I said, what's she doing? Well, she's on the computer. Now, there's something called, there's an interrupted sleep cycle that people will go through. They'll sleep 4 hours here, 3 hours there, 1 hour here, and it all adds up to 8 hours. And for them, that works. That is their sleep cycle. So those people shouldn't be drugged, like this lady I was talking about, with 3 major drugs to force them to do something else. And the key is, if you sleep whatever you sleep and you feel good during the day, leave it alone. So it depends on how the sleep is interrupted. If you're waking up all the time for other factors and then you feel tired during the day, that's when it becomes a problem. Yes, last question, and then I guess.
I was going to say teenagers, they're kind of a whole different entity. I think the school system, having them go to school at like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., they're just not there. They need to kind of modify how we're reacting or interacting with our kids.
You're absolutely correct.
They're not lazy.
They're not lazy, and if we can move our school times to about 9 a.m., kids would do a lot better. But we have to have band at 5:30, football practice at 6. I mean, we do this to our kids. But in a perfect world, we'd shift the clock a bit. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much. And again, please accept my apologies for running a bit late.